My mother demanded I cancel my wedding to avoid hurting my divorced stepsister. But when I discovered she tried to seduce my fiancé, I uninvited them both, hired security, and my mother ended up kicking my sister out of her house. I'm 30 years old. I work in digital marketing. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened with my wedding last month was so absolutely ridiculous that if I don't get it out of my system, I think I'm going to explode. And the thing is, it wasn't just the wedding day. It was everything that led up to that point. All the manipulation and drama and lies that basically made me realize that my family, specifically my mom and my half-sister, weren't the people I thought they were. I guess I should start from the beginning. When Connor proposed to me in March last year, Connor is 31. We'd been together for 6 years at that point, and the proposal was perfect. You know, nothing extravagant, but very us. We went to this park where we had our first date, and he proposed right there, by the lake, and I obviously said yes because this man is literally my favorite person in the world. We decided we wanted a January wedding, like 10 months later, because I always liked the idea of a winter wedding, and plus it gave us enough time to plan everything without stressing too much. The first thing I did was call my mom to tell her, because despite everything that happened later, at that moment I thought we had a good relationship, and her reaction was weird. Honestly. It wasn't like, "Oh my God, how exciting," or "Congratulations, honey." It was more like an uncomfortable silence and then an, "Oh, that's nice. And have you thought about how this is going to affect Paige?" And I was like, "Excuse me, what?" Because Paige is my half-sister? She's 24. And honestly, I didn't understand what she had to do with my engagement. My mom kept saying that Paige was dating someone new, this guy Ryan, and that maybe she'd feel bad that I got engaged first. Which seemed totally absurd to me because Paige had only been with this guy for like 2 months. But whatever, I decided not to make drama and just said, "Okay, Mom, I'll keep that in mind." To give you context, Paige and I were never super close. My mom remarried when I was like 12 to James, who is Paige's dad, and she was born when I was 6. We grew up together, but there was always this thing where Paige was the baby, the princess, the one everyone protected and spoiled. I understand it's normal for parents to be more protective of the younger child, but with Paige, it was different. It was like she could do whatever she wanted and everyone had to adapt to her needs and her feelings. If Paige was sad, everyone had to be sad. If Paige wanted something, everyone had to help her get it. And I learned from a young age not to cause problems. To be the easy daughter, the one who didn't ask for much. So Connor and I started planning the wedding. We rented a beautiful venue for January, hired catering, photographer, everything. We invited like 150 people, between family and friends, and honestly, we were super excited. My best friend Kimberly was going to be my maid of honor, and Connor had his brothers as groomsmen. Everything was going perfect, until in June, literally 2 months after our engagement, Paige announces she's getting married to Ryan. But not like, we're getting married next year. No, they got married in July, after only 3 months of dating. It was a super small courthouse wedding, basically just immediate family, and honestly, it seemed impulsive to me, but I thought, well, it's her life. She knows what she's doing. My mom was euphoric about Paige's wedding, like she wouldn't stop talking about how romantic it was and how brave Paige was for following her heart. And I was happy for her, genuinely, because despite everything else, I'm not a bad person, and I wanted my sister to be happy. I went to her wedding, gave her a nice gift, everything normal. But I started to notice that every time I mentioned something about my wedding, like, "Oh, we found the perfect cake," or "We already picked the flowers," my mom would kind of change the subject quickly or say something like, "That's nice. Honey, hey, did you see that Paige decorated her new apartment?" Everything became about Paige, and then July came and Paige's marriage literally exploded. Turns out Ryan, after 2 months of being married, cheated on her with her best friend, Paige's best friend. Like the person she trusted most besides Ryan? It was an absolute disaster. Obviously. Paige found out because she found messages on Ryan's phone. There was a horrible confrontation, and basically within days Ryan packed his things and left. Paige was devastated, completely broken, and moved back into my mom and James's house. And look, I felt terrible for her. Seriously. Nobody deserves that. Especially so soon after getting married. I called Paige several times, tried to be there for her, sent her supportive messages. But Paige basically ignored me. My mom told me Paige needed space, that she was processing, and I understood and gave her space. I kept planning my wedding, kept living my life, because what else could I do? You know what I mean? Months passed and we got to November. 2 months until my wedding and everything was practically ready. Connor and I were super excited. We were going to have a beautiful ceremony and then a reception with dinner and dancing. You know, nothing too fancy, but definitely special. And then my mom calls me one day and says she needs to talk to me about something important. I thought maybe she wanted to help me with some last-minute detail or something. But no. She set up a meeting at a coffee shop, and when I got there, she had that face. You know, that "I'm going to ask you something you're not going to like, but you're going to have to do it anyway" face. She sat across from me, and after like 5 minutes of talking about nonsense, she dropped the bomb. She needed me to cancel my wedding, or at least scale it down to something much smaller and more discreet. Because Paige was still suffering from her divorce, and a big wedding would be too painful for her. I literally sat there with my mouth open. I said, "Mom, you're joking." And she said no. She was completely serious. That as a family we had to support Paige in this difficult time, and that me having this huge, perfect wedding while she was going through a divorce was insensitive and selfish. I couldn't believe it. I told her we'd been planning this wedding for 8 months, that we'd spent a ton of money, that we'd already sent invitations to 150 people, that it was absurd to ask me to cancel. And my mom said, "Well then at least make it smaller, just close family, no dancing or big party, something intimate." And when I said no, that this was my wedding and I'd been planning it since before Paige even met Ryan, my mom accused me of being cold and inconsiderate. She told me that a good sister would put Paige's feelings before a party, that I could get married anytime, but Paige was only going to go through this divorce once. The conversation ended horribly. I left the coffee shop crying, and my mom sent me like 10 messages afterwards saying to think about it, to talk to Connor, to reconsider. I told Connor everything, and he was just as outraged as I was. He told me we didn't have to cancel anything, that it was our wedding, and if Paige couldn't handle it, then she just didn't have to come. Which sounded logical, but I knew that if we did that, my mom was going to make our lives impossible. And things got worse. In the following weeks, my mom started calling me almost daily, always with the same topic. Think about Paige, be understanding, family is more important than a party. James also called me a couple of times. Calmer, but basically the same message. And I kept saying no, that I wasn't going to cancel or change my wedding. But honestly, the pressure was horrible, and I started to feel super guilty, like I really was being selfish. Then my cousin Allison, who is my Aunt Elizabeth's daughter, my dad's sister, called to tell me something. Turns out Paige had been talking to several family members, literally creating this narrative that I was rubbing my wedding in her face, that I was sending her pictures of my dress and wedding details to make her feel bad, that I was being cruel to her on purpose, which was completely false. I hadn't sent Paige anything. In fact, I barely talked to her because every time I tried, she'd respond with monosyllables or leave me on read. Allison told me that several aunts, uncles, and cousins were starting to see me as the villain of the story, and that Paige was considering not going to the wedding because it was going to be too traumatic for her. And I was furious, like literally shaking with anger, because Paige was manipulating the whole family to make me look bad when I hadn't done absolutely anything. I called my mom to confront her about this, and she told me she didn't know what I was talking about, but that if Paige felt that way, there was probably a reason, and I should reflect on my actions. December came and we had Christmas. Dinner at my mom and James's house. I didn't want to go, honestly, but Connor convinced me to go because he said maybe we could work things out face to face. It was the worst decision. As soon as we arrived, Paige completely ignored me, didn't even say hello. My mom was tense all night. And then during dinner, James makes a toast and starts talking about how difficult the year has been for Paige, how strong she's been, and ends by saying, "And we hope next year is better for everyone, especially for Paige, who deserves all our understanding and support." And I, was fed up. I stood up and said, "Dad, James, that's a nice sentiment, but I'm also getting married in January, and I'd like that to be celebrated too." The silence that followed was horrible. Paige looked at me and said, "Seriously, Lily, everything has to be about you." And I said, "No, Paige. Not everything is about me, but my wedding definitely is about me and Connor, and I'm not going to apologize for being happy." And she exploded. She screamed at me that I was an insensitive bitch, that I didn't care about her feelings, that I was enjoying watching her suffer. I yelled back that she was being ridiculous, that her divorce had nothing to do with me, that I'd been planning my wedding since before she even met Ryan. My mom got involved and told me to calm down, that I was being cruel to Paige. And I said, "Mom, enough. Stop enabling Paige to manipulate everyone. It's my wedding, and if she can't be happy for me, then she just doesn't have to come." Paige started crying. James told me to leave his house, and Connor and I left. It was horrible. Like I can count on one hand the times I've had such an ugly fight with my family. The next day, my mom sent me a long message saying she was disappointed in me, that I had hurt Paige deeply, that if I went ahead with the wedding under the conditions I had planned, she and Paige weren't going to attend. And I, after talking about it with Connor and with Kimberly and with my aunt, Elizabeth, decided that was enough. I sent an email to my mom and Paige, copying James, telling them that after much reflection I had decided to uninvite them from my wedding, that I didn't want drama or negative energy on one of the most important days of my life, that I loved them but they needed to respect my boundaries, and that when they were ready to have an adult and respectful conversation about all this, I would be open to talking, but that in the meantime, I needed space. The responses were immediate and horrible. My mom called me crying, saying I was breaking up the family. How could I do this to her? That she was my mother and had a right to be at my wedding. James sent me a message saying I was a terrible daughter. Paige sent me like 50 messages, some crying and saying she couldn't believe I was excluding her, others insulting me and saying I'd always been a jealous bitch. I blocked Paige everywhere and told my mom my decision was final. But things didn't end there, obviously. Like 2 weeks before the wedding, Connor showed me some messages he'd received from Paige. She'd been writing to him, like super inappropriate messages, telling him he deserved someone better than me, that she'd always thought he was attractive, that if he ever wanted to talk, she was there for him. Basically trying to seduce my fiancé. Connor had obviously been ignoring her, but decided to tell me when the messages got too intense. I was in shock. Like I couldn't believe my own sister would try something like that. Connor blocked Paige too, and I showed the screenshots to my Aunt Elizabeth, to Allison, and to some other family members who were on Paige's side. That changed a lot of people's opinions. The wedding day came, and I was nervous but excited. I'd hired security for the venue because, you're not going to believe this, my cousin Allison had warned me that my mom and Paige were planning to show up anyway. And sure enough, like an hour before the ceremony started, my mom and Paige arrived at the venue. They tried to get in saying they were the bride's family, but security had photos of them. I'd given them to them, and wouldn't let them pass. There was a scene, obviously, with my mom yelling that she was my mother and had a right to see her daughter get married, but security was super professional and escorted them off the property. I found out about all this after the ceremony because Kimberly and my Aunt Elizabeth made sure I didn't find out until after. And honestly, I'm glad because my wedding was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful. Connor cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. Our vows were perfect. The reception was amazing with delicious food and dancing and laughter. All our friends and the family who really supported us were there, celebrating with us. My Aunt Elizabeth gave me a long hug and told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries. Several cousins and aunts and uncles who had heard Paige's version came to apologize and say they didn't know the whole story. It was the best day of my life. Honestly, Connor and I danced our first song as husband and wife, and I felt so happy, so light, like I'd taken an enormous weight off my shoulders. Because yes, it hurt that my mom and Paige weren't there, but at the same time I realized their absence was better than having them there causing drama and making everything about Paige again. What happened afterward was almost comical. Apparently, after security kicked them out of the venue, my mom and Paige had a horrible fight in the parking lot. Allison told me that Paige had told my mom that everything was her fault, that if she'd been tougher on me, I would have canceled the wedding. And my mom yelled at her that she'd done everything possible, that Paige was the one who had ruined everything with her drama and her attempts to seduce Connor. Apparently, Paige didn't know I'd shown the messages to my mom. The fight escalated so much that when they got home, they were still living together. Remember, my mom told Paige she had a month to find another place to live. James tried to mediate, but my mom was determined. I think she finally realized that Paige had manipulated the whole situation and that she'd lost her oldest daughter by allowing it. Connor and I went on our honeymoon to Costa Rica, and it was amazing. 10 days of beach and peace and not thinking about family drama. When we got back, I had like 15 messages from my mom asking to talk, that she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes, and Paige hadn't contacted me at all. I responded to my mom that I needed more time, that I wasn't ready to talk yet. It's been like 6 weeks since the wedding, and my mom is still trying to fix things. James called me last week to apologize, said he'd realized they'd always overprotected Paige and that it hadn't helped her. Paige apparently found an apartment with a friend and moved out 2 weeks ago. We haven't talked since all this, and I'm okay. Honestly. Better than okay. Connor and I are happily married, living our life, planning our future. It hurts that my relationship with my mom is broken. I'm not going to lie. And there are moments when I wonder if I did the right thing. But then I remember how happy I felt at my wedding, surrounded by people who genuinely love and support me, without drama or manipulation. And I think, yes, I definitely did the right thing. Sometimes setting boundaries means you're going to lose people, even family. But if those people are only causing you pain and stress, then maybe it's better that way. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive my mom and Paige, maybe with time and with them really understanding what they did wrong. But for now, I'm focused on my marriage, on my life, on surrounding myself with people who lift me up instead of people who just want to control me. And that's enough.